Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere hot. You're standing barefoot in golden sand that's just a little too warm for comfort, staring up at a monument so enormous it seems to dare the sun to compete. You squint and the horizon wobbles with heat. Somewhere nearby, a ibis shrieks and a camel sighs dramatically. And in the middle of this sun-drenched landscape, you notice something off. The mighty ruler carved in stone-proud shoulders, angular jaw, has a fake beard strapped to his chin. A beard so immaculately curled it almost seems like it's winking at you. You've landed in ancient Egypt where sand gets everywhere. Everyone's a bit sunburnt in beards. Beards are not grown, they are bestowed, or glued, or tied on with ribbon. And tonight you're about to find out why. You'll walk the halls of temples and palaces, peek into sacred tombs, and maybe, just maybe, tie on a beard or two yourself. You probably won't survive this in real life, not with the sun, the taxes, and the occasional vengeful crocodile god. But luckily you're horizontal, and this is History Bedtime Edition. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and local time in the comments so we can see who else is drifting off to Egyptian beard dreams around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking through the bustling marketplace of thieves dodging donkeys and linen merchants when you see a bearded child. Not just a child with a dirty face, no. This kid is sporting a tiny black, clearly artificial chin tuft tied on with thread and flapping slightly in the breeze. You blink. Is this some kind of festival? But then you see it again, this time on a statue of a cat goddess in a nearby temple again. A perfectly symmetrical, suspiciously immaculate beard poking straight out from her feline chin. Turns out in ancient Egypt, fake beards weren't just for men. They weren't even just for humans. They were everywhere. Pharaohs wore them, yes. Queens often. Gods, absolutely. Even certain ceremonial animals got the chin treatment. It was less about actual facial hair and more about what the beard meant. Power, divinity, stability, and sometimes the sheer theater of it all. You pause at a street shrine where a priest is lighting incense in front of a statue of Osiris, the god of the dead. Osiris, of course, is wearing the classic plaited ceremonial beard, long, narrow, slightly curved at the end, like he's dipped it in godly wax. He's been dead for eternity, so it's not exactly growing in naturally. But the beard tells you everything you need to know this guy's divine, and he means business. Historians still argue whether the beards had any original practical use. Were they copies of early tribal leaders' real facial hair, or purely religious from the beginning? No one's quite sure. But by the time hieroglyphs were in full swing, the fake beard had become a loaded visual symbol, an official badge of cosmic authority. The sun is high now, and the Nile sparkles like it's been sprinkled with diamonds. You glance at a group of officials crossing a small bridge, each dressed in pristine white linen. Their chins are bare except for one man, a vizier, whose narrow chin beard announces that he's been temporarily divine. Maybe he's leading a ceremony, or judging a legal dispute, or just trying to look impressive at brunch. Either way, his beard says, "I'm important today." Respect the fuzz. And then there's the actual pharaoh. You catch a glimpse of him being paraded through the street on a litter fans, waving musicians playing a steady hypnotic rhythm. And there it is, his beard. It's not growing out of his face. It's tied on with golden thread and sculpted into an impossibly neat angle. Not even a hair out of place. Probably weighs more than your laptop. The thing about the pharaoh's beard is that it's never just decoration. It's a statement, a declaration that this human is the living god Horus on earth, a walking, ruling divine being. And apparently godhood comes with a chin strap. The sweat trickles down your spine as you duck into a shaded courtyard. A vendor waves over a small child and gently adjusts the angle of her ceremonial beard, likely part of a festival roll. You can't help but smile. Even in this ancient world, there's still someone yelling, "Hold still, sweetie," as they fuss with costume pieces. Of course, in the real world, you wouldn't have qualified for a beard, not unless you were born into status or performing a sacred duty. Commoners didn't get chin wigs, real beards. Maybe if you were working class and didn't care much for daily grooming, but the fancy plaited kind, that was elite territory. The clean-shaven face actually symbolized cleanliness and purity, except when it didn't, because Egypt was nothing if not full of contradictions. You rest against a cool column, listening to a scribe read off inventory lists for temple offerings. His chin is clean. But if this man were to act in a ritual drama, say impersonating a deity for a harvest ceremony, he might strap on a beard. Just for the day. Just for the show. It's like cosplay, but with cosmic implications. And even in moments of death, the beard didn't go away. Funeral masks often included them, especially for elite burials. The idea was to appear as Osiris, king of the afterlife. And Osiris never seen without his divine facial tinsel. You take one last look around the market. The smell of roasting duck mingles with incense and river reeds. The city is alive, but behind the daily grind is this quiet, persistent current, the idea that appearance is ritual, symbol, a performance for the gods. And if the gods expect you to have a beard, well, you find a way. Even if it involves goat hair beeswax and the patience of a saint. The sun begins to dip, throwing long shadows across the temple walls. You yawn the way people do in every century and wonder briefly how anyone slept with a braided beard, poking them in the collarbone. But that's tomorrow's question. The smell of sandalwood smoke trails behind you as you follow the pharaoh into his inner sanctum, a place so drenched in gold, it practically glows in the dim light. Every surface reflects your blurry shape, and every statue stares back at you with calm, unwavering eyes. But there's something oddly uniform about them. The gods, the kings, even the lions. All of them sport the same regal little beard, long, narrow, immaculately plaited, and sometimes dramatically curled at the tip, like they've all been to the same divine stylist. You start to realize something that's been hovering beneath the surface of all the grandeur in ancient Egypt. The fake beard wasn't just fashion, it was a symbol of transformation. Strap it on, and you weren't just a person anymore. You were divine, elevated, cosplaying eternity, if you will. It's a hot day, and your linen tunic clings to your back as you duck into a side chamber filled with wall paintings. Here a younger pharaoh is being reborn by priests in a sacred ritual. And what's the first step of this divine makeover? Spoiler alert, not moisturize and exfoliate. No, it's apply beard. A ceremonial beard stiff and long, and probably itchy but deeply essential. It marks him as Horus reborn. Not Horus adjacent, not Horus on weekends. Horus in the flesh, baby. Historians still argue whether the beards originated with the gods and were copied by men, or whether early rulers wore facial hair and were later mythologized into deities. Either way, by the time you're standing in this hallway, the idea is cemented. Beard function, divinity. Beard function, pharaoh. Beard function, legitimacy. Lose the beard, you might as well return your crown and apologize to the Nile. You lean closer to a painted image of the god Ptah, patron of craftsmen and architects. He's got the short, straight beard style, no curl. A subtle visual way of saying, I build things, I don't have time for flair. That's the other thing about these beards, they came in different cuts. Straight for the gods, curled for the pharaohs. It's like heaven's version of corporate dress code. And don't think the symbolism stops with beards alone. These chin accessories were made deliberately elaborate, often crafted with goat hair, real or dyed black, and tied onto the face with string or ribbons, sometimes threaded through tiny holes in the headdress or wig. Occasionally, high-ranking individuals had metal beard pieces shaped from gold or copper. You didn't just slap one of these on before brunch. There were procedures, assistants, possibly a few heated arguments. You pass through another corridor and a massive stone depiction of Osiris towers over you. He's in full afterlife regalia, crook flail, and of course that splendid curved beard. The beard is what tells you instantly this is no mortal. This is a god who rules the dead. The curved end of the beard distinguishes him from the straight-bearded regular deities. A flourish, a little bit of flair. Even in eternity, people need accessories. One scribe nearby is whispering the myth of Osiris to a wide-eyed group of schoolchildren. You eavesdrop because, honestly, it's more interesting than half your college lectures. Osiris, he says, was murdered by his jealous brother Set, chopped into pieces, and reassembled by his loving wife Isis. But when he came back, he wasn't quite the same. He became the ruler of the underworld, dignified, dead, and unmistakably bearded. You can't help but wonder, was the beard his before or after his tragic dismemberment? Was it stitched on with the rest of him? Did Isis save it for last, like frosting, on a particularly creepy cake? Scholars love that question. Historians still argue whether the ceremonial beard of Osiris predates his association with resurrection or was added to visually mark his transformation. It's one of those chicken or beard scenarios. Stepping back into daylight, you squint at the massive statue of Amenhotep III in the courtyard. His beard is still mostly intact, though a bit chipped at the end. About 3,000 years of wear and tear will do that. You marvel at how seriously they took this whole thing. We glue on fake mustaches for party gags. They did it to invoke eternity. But this wasn't a look everyone could pull off. The beard had rules. If you were a pharaoh, sure, you were expected to wear one during ceremonies and public appearances. But if you were a priest, your chin had to be smooth, clean-shaven as a sign of purity. Unless, of course, you were impersonating a god for a ritual drama. In which case, yes, out comes the fake beard. You can see where this gets confusing. Even in divine bureaucracy, there were exceptions to every policy. Your sandals crunch on gravel as you circle a sacred pool. A young boy balances a bundle of reeds on his head, watching you warily. You smile, wondering if he's next in line to become a god in a temple drama. Somewhere inside a trunk full of beards waits short ones, long ones curled, dyed, maybe even one trimmed badly by a clumsy apprentice who's since been demoted to papyrus copy duty. The strangest part, these fake beards weren't even pretending to be real beards. They weren't subtle. They weren't trying to trick anyone. Everyone knew they were artificial. That was the point. They weren't about masculinity or grooming. They were about status, sacred power, symbolism. You didn't want people to think your beard had grown in overnight. You wanted them to know you were wearing it because you could. You find a small carving tucked in a corner of the temple wall, a forgotten figure kneeling with arms outstretched and beard fully intact. There's something humble about it. Not a grand pharaoh, not a flashy god. Just someone, somewhere who believed that donning the beard brought them closer to the divine, or at least looked impressive for the funeral portraits. The sun casts long shadows now, and the sandstone glows with that pinkish-orange light only found in the Nile Valley at dusk. You sit down on a bench and let the heat soak into your bones. Around you, invisible centuries swirl past. Rulers come and go. Dynasties rise and crumble. But the beards persist, tied on, waxed, curled, and totally essential. Because in a world built on ritual illusion and divine theater, the fake beard wasn't fake at all. It was real in the only way that mattered. The moon is rising over the Nile now, casting soft silver light across its surface. And you're walking along the riverbank beside a temple wall so massive it makes you feel like a grain of sand in a sandstorm. The cool breeze off the water is welcome, and for the first time today, you're not sweating through your clothes. You pause to look at the carvings illuminated by flickering torchlight, rows and rows of figures, each with those signature Egyptian profiles, each with a beard that curls like the tail of a contented cat. You're starting to see them everywhere now. Not just on kings and gods, but on minor officials and carving sacred animals, even the occasional tomb guardian statue. It's like there was a national chin hair obsession that got a bit out of hand. But the pattern is too precise to be random. There's a code here, a visual language, and you're about to crack it. You step into a low-ceilinged chamber where a priest, older, half asleep, is reciting a prayer in time with a drum beat. His voice is soft, but your eyes are drawn to the statue behind him. It's Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war and healing. And what's that under her feline jaw? You guessed it. A beard, curled, braided, symbolic, possibly ticklish. You don't ask. What's fascinating is that Sekhmet isn't alone in this. Many goddesses, when shown in particularly divine or ruling roles, get the beard treatment too. It's not about gender, it's about divine authority. And in Egypt, authority had a very specific aesthetic. Whether you were a sun god or a lioness deity with serious anger issues, the beard was part of the ensemble. This brings us to something wild queens wore them too. You duck into another chamber, dim and cool, and there on the wall is Queen Hatshepsut. You stare for a while. Yep, there it is. The unmistakable beard drawn in tight braids, hanging from her chin, just like a pharaoh. Because she was pharaoh. Hatshepsut didn't just act as pharaoh behind the scenes. She declared herself king in every possible way. She wore the kilt, the headdress, and yes, the ceremonial beard. Whether or not she could grow one naturally wasn't the point. What mattered was the visual grammar of power. If you looked like a king and you did the job of a king, then as far as Egypt was concerned, you were one. She didn't care if the patriarchy blinked twice, she had temples to build. Historians still argue whether her beard-wearing was purely political, an attempt to assert control over her male rivals, or whether it reflected deeper religious convictions about kingship and divine image. Either way, the image stuck. And her statues all bearded, her portraits bearded, her legacy beard first, questions later. You walk a little further, and in the darkness, you hear a quiet metallic clink. A temple attendant organizing ceremonial items for the next festival lifts a small wooden box and gently opens it. Inside, what else? A collection of fake beards, each one wrapped in linen and oiled to keep it supple. You imagine them carefully tied onto performers and officials. You wonder if they ever got mixed up, if someone ever wore a sun god's beard to a grain ceremony and got side-eyed by a particularly judgmental priest. Outside, a cluster of stars twinkle above, and you lie back on the smooth stone steps leading to the river. The air smells of warm mud, crushed papyrus, and faint incense. Above you, the Milky Way stretches across the sky like a strip of linen draped by Nut, the goddess of the heavens. You start to see the cosmic connection. Heaven gods, rulers, all part of the same visual and symbolic order. The beard wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a binding agent, a visual cue that said this figure is not like the others. This figure channels something bigger. And the deeper you go, the more it seems that this elaborate chin-based theater had less to do with masculinity and more to do with alignment with the gods, with order, with the cosmos. Egypt thrived on the concept of ma'at, cosmic harmony and balance. Rulers weren't just figureheads, they were conductors of a divine orchestra. So if a fake beard helped you hit the right note, you wore it. You think about all the materials they must have used. Goat hair, sure, but sometimes horsehair, palm fibers, or even tightly bound human hair. Bound in wax or resin, shaped with tools and dyed jet black. And if you were really fancy, gold leaf, or in the case of death masks like Tutankhamun's, solid gold inlaid with lapis lazuli, the ultimate beard flex. The mask of Tutankhamun, now safely tucked away behind thick museum glass, once lay atop the young king's mummified body with that long, curved beard attached. But interestingly, that same beard actually fell off during a cleaning incident in 2014 and had to be reattached with epoxy, a literal golden beard superglued. Ancient Egypt meets modern DIY panic. You chuckle softly. Somewhere out there, an ancient embalmer just rolled over in his linen wrappings. Back in ancient times, funerary practices often included outfitting the deceased with a fake beard, not just kings, but also high-ranking nobles and priests. It was part of the visual transformation into an Osiris figure. In death, you became divine. And to show that, well, you'd better have that beard ready. Death was no time to go bare-chinned. You wander back toward the main road, passing a quiet courtyard with a broken statue slumped against the wall. Its face is weathered beyond recognition, but the beard stump remains just a sliver of symbolic authority clinging on through the centuries. You touch the stone. It's cool and smooth and patient. And for a moment, as the breeze stirs, the reeds and the torches flicker in their sconces, you understand. It was never about fashion. It was always about becoming something more than yourself. A dog barks somewhere in the distance, and the sound echoes faintly off temple walls as you move deeper into the ancient city. The streets are narrow here, paved with uneven stone, and your sandals scuff softly as you walk. The stars are still out, but the sky is beginning to hint at dawn. As you pass through a shadowed archway, the world seems to pause, quiet, sacred, and somehow timeless. You feel like you've stepped sideways into a moment where everything matters just a little more. You turn a corner and stumble into a training courtyard, stone benches, cracked statues, and a half-buried practice altar at the center. A wooden rack leans against one wall, loaded with priestly costumes, elaborate robes, headdresses, sandals for sacred processions. And hanging from one peg, slightly crooked, a ceremonial beard made of woven reeds and blackened wax. You reach out curious and give it a gentle tug. It swings slightly heavier than you'd expect, like a weight not just of material, but of meaning. You start to imagine the ritual that beard might have belonged to. Ancient Egypt was a land of festivals, loud, colorful, often chaotic events that blended religion, performance, and a good excuse to drink beer under the sun. And in many of these festivals, There were reenactments, priests, and chosen townspeople stepping into the roles of gods, kings, and cosmic forces. And when someone stepped into the role of a god, the first thing strapped to their face was that beard. It was the fastest route from mortal to myth. Historians still argue whether these rituals were intended purely as symbolic performances or were believed to temporarily transform the participant into a living avatar of the divine. Either way, the beard was non-negotiable. No beard, no godhood. Try showing up to a reenactment of the said festival without your ceremonial beard, and you'd probably be asked to go sweep the goat pens instead. You sit on one of the benches, resting your feet, and your mind drifts back to those said festivals. Celebrated after 30 years of a pharaoh's reign, assuming they made it that long, they were massive renewal ceremonies meant to rejuvenate the king's power. In part of the ritual, you guessed it, the pharaoh would appear with all his sacred regalia, including the classic beard. It was a literal and symbolic refresh button. Even the temples themselves contributed to the illusion. In carvings and statues, the fake beard was never just slapped on like an afterthought. It was central to the image. You remember seeing one sculpture earlier. Its beard was the most carefully preserved part, even while the nose and hands had long since crumbled. Almost like time itself respected the beard. You notice that even the guards and ceremonial attendants carved on tomb walls sometimes wear shorter, simpler versions of the beard. This wasn't just about divine beings anymore. It had become part of the aesthetic of order. If a figure was meant to represent someone with authority, or someone participating in sacred space, they might get a tiny chin piece too. The ancient Egyptian equivalent of a VIP badge. There's even evidence that fake beards were made for statues of sacred animals. Ever seen a bearded ram? You have now. Or a bearded bull representing the Apis deity. And while we're at it, yes, mummified cats were sometimes buried with little bits of decorative jewelry and occasionally a symbolic beard or two. Because if cats weren't gods in ancient Egypt, they were at least adjacent enough to warrant a few holy accessories. You picture a temple storeroom dark and musky, filled with drawers of fake beards in all shapes and materials. One drawer marked crook-tipped Osiris styles. Another labeled youthful Horus keep straight. The poor intern priest assigned to untangle the wrong set must have had a truly rough morning. You make a mental note to appreciate your boring spreadsheet job a little more. The question nags at you though, how did the beard stay on? There's not a lot of documentation. Most beards were believed to be tied behind the ears or fastened into the headdress with woven cords. Occasionally, the attachment points were hidden under elaborate wigs. And yes, those wigs were serious business. Picture long braids made from human hair, stiffened with beeswax, decorated with beads, and then imagine strapping a fake beard under all that. Ancient Egyptian fashion was not low maintenance. There's a papyrus fragment that mentions attendants checking a pharaoh's ceremonial gear before a major ritual, robe, scepter, sandals, headdress, and false beard fittings. You smile imagining the pharaoh grumbling like a grumpy toddler. Is it on straight? It itches. I'm the living god of Egypt, and I have string in my mouth. And then there were the funerals, especially royal ones. Mummification wasn't just a medical process, it was a transformation. You weren't just preserved, you were being prepared for a journey to the afterlife as a fully divine being. So naturally the beard came back into play. Even if you'd never worn one in life, you'd likely be given one in death. That's how vital the symbol was. Tutankhamun's famous golden mask has that striking beard arched at the end, inlaid with dark blue stripes. It curves ever so slightly, a mark of divinity, of transformation, of rebirth. And let's not forget he died as a teenager. No chance of growing that kind of majestic chin fuzz on his own. But death gave him the upgrade. Historians still argue whether the beard on his mask was modeled after older, more powerful pharaohs to boost his status, or whether it followed standard artistic conventions of the time. Either way, it did the trick. 3,000 years later, his bearded visage still draws crowds. As the light changes and the air warms, you stretch your legs and stand brushing dust from your tunic. You feel like you've begun to understand not just what the beards meant, but how far they reached. They weren't about vanity, they were tools, symbols, ritual keys to unlock layers of identity, king, god, ancestor, cosmic force. And tomorrow you'll dive deeper still, into the artisans who made the beards, the rituals that wore them, and maybe even the scandals that broke out when someone dared to appear unbearded. You're still up, aren't you? Draped in moonlight and temple dust, trailing the scent of old incense and sun-baked limestone? There's something comforting about this steady walk through ancient stillness. No crowds, no glowing phone screens. Just you and the whispers of a civilization that really, really loved its costume jewelry, including those iconic, improbable beards. Tonight, though, you're slipping into a different side of the story, the side behind the scenes. The workshops, the artisans, the people who actually made the fake beards. Because believe it or not, somebody had to sit down day after day and craft those majestic chin danglers with meticulous care. Spoiler alert, it wasn't the pharaoh. You duck through a narrow doorway and find yourself in a small workshop room, or what's left of it. Low benches, faded wall art showing scribes and craftsmen, and in one corner, a basket of tools left behind in some long-forgotten rush. You imagine the space bustling with activity leather workers, boiling glue, metal workers threading fine gold wire, hairdressers arguing about braid tightness. All of them gathered around one common goal: make the pharaoh look good enough to be mistaken for Ra himself. These beard makers were part of Egypt's sacred economy, the huge humming machinery behind every major ritual. They worked under priestly supervision, followed strict visual codes, and possibly gossiped a lot while braiding goat hair. Their work had to be flawless. A crooked ceremonial beard could throw off an entire ritual. You didn't want the high priest raising an eyebrow mid-incantation because the king's beard was lopsided. Materials varied by class and occasion. For the kings and gods, gold lapis, lazuli, obsidian, or jet black glass. For nobles or temple staff, reed linen, copper wire, goat hair bound with wax. Some were curved at the tip, symbol of divinity linked to Osiris. Others were straight and tight, symbol of kingship power in the earthly realm. Basically, your beard style said everything about your cosmic resume. Historians still argue whether these materials carried deeper spiritual meanings or were just practical choices. Was lapis supposed to channel divine energy, or was it just the most expensive thing around? Did reed beards carry symbolism of fertility, or just grow near the workshop? Either way, they all meant something once they were strapped on. And strapping them on was no joke. These beards weren't like novelty party props with elastic strings. No, sir, they were engineered. Some had braided leather cords to tie behind the ears or around the skull. Others hooked directly into the ceremonial wigs, almost like clip-in extensions for your jawline. Try not to imagine one falling off mid-ceremony and landing in someone's beer offering. Or do. It's kind of hilarious. You peek at a clay tablet half buried in the floor, a faded diagram, possibly beard style, sketched for approval. There's a note in red ink, maybe from an overseer, that reads something like, not curly enough. More godlike, fix. Even 3,000 years ago, there were creative directors breathing down someone's neck. One fringe theory: some of the beard makers might have been part of the house of life, the temple scribes and artisans, trained in sacred knowledge. These weren't just craftsmen, they were initiates. Their work wasn't decoration, it was ritual technology. You weren't just tying goat hair to a stick, you were shaping cosmic symbols, tools to transform a human into an avatar of divine order. And you thought your job had pressure? Over time, styles shifted. Early beards were shorter and more rigid. Later ones grew longer with elegantly curved tips and ornate inlays. Some had tightly wound braids so fine they looked like ropes. Others were embossed with sacred imagery, Ankh's cobra, the eye of Horus. Wearing one was like strapping a billboard of cosmic credentials to your face. You walk outside past a small canal where lotus flowers float quietly in the dark water. The moonlight catches something shiny stuck in the mud, a tiny piece of gilded braid, probably lost centuries ago. You fish it out and turn it in your hand. It's light, delicate. Maybe once part of a royal funeral or a misfired festival rehearsal. You tuck it gently into your pocket, a silent souvenir of Egypt's soft obsession with sacred disguise. And speaking of disguise, there's one detail people often miss. The beards weren't always about who you were. Sometimes they were about who you were becoming. That's why they appeared not just in life, but in death, in art, in magic spells, and in dream interpretation. Wearing the beard meant crossing a threshold, from man to ruler, from priest to god, from dead body to eternal being. There's even a strange little magical incantation tucked into the pyramid text, an ancient spell where the dead king calls upon Osiris and says, "I have fastened the beard of a god upon myself." as if the beard is a final sacred upgrade, the last accessory before immortality. Imagine lying in your tomb, the embalmer chanting softly, the room thick with resin smoke, and someone gently secures a fake beard to your chin, the last earthly touch before your journey into the stars. It's strangely tender and oddly bureaucratic. No divine rebirth without proper facial attachments. Next, back at the workshop, the room's empty again. The walls hum with memory. You imagine an apprentice, eyes wide, trying not to mess up his first divine beard. The master craftsman muttering under his breath. Somewhere nearby, a goat probably bleats at the wrong moment. And you realize somewhere between the sacred and the ridiculous, the Egyptians had created a symbol that lived across every layer of life. It wasn't just a beard. It was identity, aspiration, power, and transformation all rolled into one curiously waxed chin strap. And tomorrow you'll take a closer look at how these beards weren't just worn, they were protected, punished, and even politicized. Because in Egypt, if you messed with a fake beard, well, let's just say things could get real awkward. The sun rises slowly over the Nile, a soft, golden thread stitching the riverbanks to the horizon. You squint into the light, watching it glint off temple columns and the backs of ibis birds hunting along the shallows. A soft breeze carries the scent of warm papyrus and something vaguely metallic like copper tools left out in the sun. You keep walking, sandals whispering against ancient stone, and feel the weight of the past pressing ever so gently on your shoulders. And chin. Always the chin. By now you know that fake beards in ancient Egypt weren't a joke, they were sacred gear. But you haven't yet seen just how seriously these people took their sacred gear. This wasn't casual cosplay. Wearing a ceremonial beard came with rules, expectations, and wait for it, consequences. You enter a smaller chamber tucked behind a main temple hall. It's cooler here, the light filtered through latticed stone. On the wall, a mural partly faded, partly intact. A pharaoh is standing tall, crook and flail, crossed over his chest, his beard perfectly straight. Beside him, a servant face down, hands raised in apology. And yes, his own little beard snapped in half. You can almost hear the stern priest in the background yelling, "We do not disrespect the chin, Thutmose." It turns out ancient Egyptians weren't shy about policing how the beard was worn. It had to be clean, properly tied and styled to match your ritual role. If it curved when it shouldn't or was too long for your station, you might get publicly corrected, or worse, ritually demoted. It was fashion, but also hierarchy, religion, and law. That little piece of facial furniture could make or break you literally in some cases. Historians still argue whether actual punishments were enforced for miswearing ceremonial beards, or if the consequences were mostly symbolic. Some texts hint at sanctions like being barred from certain temple rites or denied offerings for a day. Others suggest it was more spiritual, you'd invite bad luck or worse, divine disapproval. Basically the Egyptian version of being smited, but with bureaucracy. And here's the fun part. There were actual laws about impersonating sacred figures, and you better believe that included false beards. Pretending to be a priest, forbidden. Pretending to be a king, deeply unwise. Pretending to be Osiris without authorization, hoo boy. Unless you were the pharaoh or a ritual actor with the priest's blessing, wearing the full curled divine beard was like walking into a cathedral and announcing, "Hey, I'm God now." Not advisable. One particularly spicy tale buried in a fragmentary court record tells of a temple servant caught wearing a long ceremonial beard during a festival rehearsal without clearance. Was he just trying it on? Was he making a joke? Or was he staging some kind of symbolic protest? No one's sure. But what is clear is that the beard was confiscated and he was reassigned to latrine duty for a month. And yes, ancient Egyptian latrines were exactly as glamorous as you're imagining. So naturally, fake beards were locked up when not in use, stored in temple vaults, cataloged, inventoried, and sometimes even blessed before being passed from one user to another. These weren't just props, they were temple property. You didn't check one out like a library book, you earned it. Imagine a sacred closet somewhere behind the sanctuary filled with waxed bundles and linen-wrapped pieces of gold and copper. A priest unlocks the chest with great care. Inside, a dozen ceremonial beards rest like sleeping serpents, each with its own history. Ah yes, this one was worn by High Priest Menkaperre in the Festival of the Valley. He had excellent posture. And this one, don't touch that one, it's cursed, probably. But it wasn't all severity and rules. Sometimes a system cracked just enough to let the unexpected through. There's one delightful anecdote, half historical, half legendary, of a royal cat who became a bit of a temple mascot. Spoiled beyond belief, given treats, titles, even a miniature litter-sized shrine. And one day the priest decided to dress him for a mock ritual, tiny beard and all. There's no surviving image, sadly, but just imagine a deeply annoyed temple cat with a 3-inch curled beard tied gently under his furry chin, plotting eternal revenge on humanity. Whether or not it actually happened doesn't matter. The fact that people told the story tells you something about the culture's reverence and their humor. Egyptians loved symbols, yes, but they also had room for the occasional sacred chuckle. Even Ra probably rolled his eyes sometimes. Still, fake beards weren't just sacred accessories. They were political lightning rods. Remember, Hatshepsut, the only woman to rule Egypt as pharaoh in her own right. She had statues carved with the traditional king's beard, not because she was pretending to be male, but because the role of pharaoh required the beard. It wasn't a gender statement, it was a job uniform. Historians still argue whether Hatshepsut's beard was a strategic PR move to calm conservative priests or a power play to fully embody the office of kingship. Either way, she wore it like a boss. You can almost hear her thinking, if a chin strap made of gold is what gets me divine power and command over 20,000 men past the beeswax. And her statues weren't subtle. They show her with the straight ceremonial beard, head held high, face calm, and eternal. The message: I am Pharaoh. This is the look. Deal with it. Her example shows you that the beard wasn't about biology. It was about authority. You could be young, old, male, female, as long as you wore the beard. In the right context, you became something more. Something official, sacred, larger than life. So tonight, as the stars blink back into view and the cicadas start humming again, you reflect on the power of symbols. A fake beard sounds silly until you realize it was a key, a lock, a warning, a halo for the chin. And if you wore it wrong, well, let's just say you probably weren't invited to the next said festival. Tomorrow you'll get into even stranger territory. Beards and spells, beards and dreams, beards that show up in magic papyri to ward off evil or call down gods. Because apparently in ancient Egypt, you couldn't even sleep without your sacred chin gear making an appearance. The night deepens. The stars have fully stitched themselves across the velvet sky, and a crescent moon casts a quiet, silver glow across the temple roofs. You walk slower now. The stones beneath your feet are cool, and every echo feels longer, stretched out like linen in the sun. The city has quieted, but the magic, oh, it's just getting started. See, by now you've learned that a fake beard in ancient Egypt wasn't just something you wore for a parade. It wasn't just ceremonial, it was metaphysical. That tiny, twitchy line between the material world and the unseen Egyptians braided it into their rituals and into their bedtime spells. Because tonight we're diving headfirst into the surreal world of magic dreams and beard-based incantations. Let's start with the pyramid texts. These are some of the oldest religious writings in the world, carved into the walls of royal tombs in the Old Kingdom, meant to help the pharaoh navigate the afterlife. And tucked among all the soaring odes to Ra and elaborate sky maps, yep, beards. Lots of them. Specifically spells that reference attaching the beard of Osiris as a step in becoming divine. One incantation reads like a checklist. You're granted wings. You rise to the sky. You're given the beard of a god. And then, only then, you're declared immortal. It's like a very picky airline check-in process. Sorry, sir, you have your scarab amulet, your Book of the Dead boarding pass, but where is your chin credential? Historians still argue whether these spells refer to physical rituals done during mummification or if they're purely symbolic. Did they really tie something to the mummy's chin during the burial? Or was it just metaphorical language for spiritual transformation? The answer, as usual in ancient Egypt, is probably yes and no, and it depends on which priest you asked. And it wasn't just pharaohs who got beard blessings. You find traces of chin-related magic in dream interpretations and protective spells too. There's a delightful chunk of papyrus written in that scratchy, rushed, demotic script, listing what different beard dreams might mean. Dreaming of growing a beard. Good omen. Prosperity coming your way. Dreaming your beard falls off. Uh-oh. Loss of status, maybe even spiritual danger. Dreaming your beard is braided by a stranger. That one's complicated. Depending on the phase of the moon, it could mean marriage deception or being blessed by a god disguised as a goat herder. One fringe theory suggests that some traveling magicians wore small false beards not to claim divine status, but to signal their knowledge of esoteric arts. Like a business card, but make it chinware. Of course, no solid physical evidence backs that up yet. But still, imagine wandering through a village market, spotting a man in a simple linen tunic with a dainty braided beard tied under his chin, and thinking, yep, that guy is probably carrying 6 amulets and 3 curses in his pocket. You wander now into what might have been a small shrine. There's a faint smell of cedar and something sweeter perhaps, old incense, or the memory of it. In one dusty corner, tucked behind a broken statuette of Hathor, you find an old scroll container. It's too late for real scrolls, but the idea lingers that inside you might find a protection spell. Something to place under your bed at night. Something that reads, "Tie the beard of Osiris upon thyself, speak the name of Mayat thrice, and no night demon shall cross thy threshold." In this world, the beard is a boundary, a spiritual fence, something to anchor your soul during sleep when dreams made you vulnerable to wandering spirits and the occasional magical crocodile. Yes, that was a thing. Beards also show up in Heka, the general Egyptian word for magic. Heka was both a force and a deity, the magic and the magician. And sometimes to invoke Heka properly, you'd have to wear the symbols of the gods, including, a ceremonial beard. It was a form of channeling. Not I'm pretending to be Osiris, but rather I'm borrowing his frequency. Like spiritual cosplay with serious stakes. One lesser-known piece of magical lore involves transformation spells where the beard is the final step. You recite 77 names of the sun god, you hold a lotus, you trace a scarab in ash, and at the end you say, "Fasten now the sacred beard, and I am no longer I am that which speaks from the throne." Boom, instant upgrade. Not every spell was quite so majestic. Some were downright practical. One little-known spell to get rid of bedbugs seriously involves drawing a beard on your doorway with ochre and reciting a phrase invoking Osiris to guard the night. Bedbugs protected by godly chin swag. You can't make this stuff up, or rather they did, with great flair. You pass a cracked mirror laid flat on a stone altar. Your reflection flickers as torchlight dances across it. You imagine yourself with a little gold beard, maybe curled, maybe straight just enough to pass as dreamworthy. Would it work? Would the demons of the night back off and whisper, "Oops, wrong person. This one's already been claimed by Osiris"? And somewhere in the back of your mind a question itches. What if the beard isn't just a symbol but a spell, a kind of wearable magic? One that says, "I'm in control now. I walk with the gods. My chin says so." Even today, when you look at the statues of pharaohs in museums, it's the beard that catches your eye. Always there. Always just slightly too perfect. It whispers of things seen in dreams of power, imagined, and then woven into reality. As the night draws on, your thoughts grow hazy, tangled like braids in the wind. You feel a little more anchored, a little more ancient. And somewhere inside, perhaps part of you is already dreaming a dream where you walk through columns of light wearing the soft weight of a ceremonial beard, and every doorway opens before you. A hush falls over the temple courtyard as you make your way past statues bathed in moonlight, their carved faces frozen in serene judgment. The sandstone beneath your feet is cool and dimpled, shaped by centuries of steps taken by sandaled priests and occasionally the odd sacred cat. The air hums with a kind of quiet expectation. You've traced the spiritual meaning of Egypt's fake beards across ritual magic and dreams, but now it's time to go where few dare, deep into the royal workshop where chin fashion was forged. Yes, tonight you're slipping behind the veil of sacred craftsmanship. The forgers of the pharaohs, the stylists of the spiritual realm, the ancient beard makers of Egypt. Imagine stepping into a long, low room tucked beside a temple, half shadows, half clanging bronze tools. On one side, a workbench crusted with scraps of hammered gold and copper wire. On the other, trays of beeswax linen cords, and oddly enough, a whole selection of tiny chisels labeled with symbols like, "For Osiris use only," or "Pharaoh curls delicate." That's right. These chin adornments weren't whipped up overnight. They were engineered, fashioned with the same level of reverence and neurosis you'd reserve today for a national flag or the Olympic torch. The basic materials varied by status. For kings and gods, think precious metals. Gold most often hammered thin and shaped like a miniature codpiece for your chin. If that image wakes you up a little, sorry. But seriously, some of these ceremonial beards were dazzling. Intricate braids of gold filigree, inlaid turquoise and lapis lazuli accents. You know, in case the gods were checking your craftsmanship. For high priests or lesser royals, you might see stiffened linen, sometimes coated in resin or wrapped with metal thread. Still symbolic, still sacred, but not quite on the Osiris level reward tier. Kind of like earning silver in the Divine Chin Olympics. And yes, they were attached. Securely, often tied behind the ears or hooked under the jaw with fine linen bands. In some elaborate cases, a supporting chin strap made of flexible wood or leather would keep the beard in place, especially during long ceremonies. You didn't want your symbolic authority flopping mid-incantation. Nothing kills a divine moment like your god beard slipping sideways. Historians still argue whether all ceremonial beards were made anew for each wearer, or whether they were reused and passed down like sacred heirlooms. Some records suggest families donated beards to temples in honor of a deceased loved one, especially if that person had served in a priestly role. Which does make you wonder, was there a beard checkout system? Did some poor scribe have to keep track of who borrowed the sacred Osiris 3000 and forgot to return it? We don't have an ancient Egyptian version of Etsy, but based on surviving artifacts and temple reliefs, it's clear there were specialists. Artisans trained in the fine and oddly specific field of divine beard making. They had to balance aesthetics, theology, and structural engineering, all while working in a culture that took symbolism deathly seriously. Take the angle of the curl, for instance. Pharaoh's beards curled outward at the tip. God's beards curved under. So getting that little loop wrong wasn't just a design flaw, it was theological blasphemy. A backwards curl could imply the wearer had confused earthly authority with divinity. Not a great look. Definitely wouldn't pass a priestly dress code. One particularly curious case involves a tomb painting from the 19th dynasty that appears to show a craftsman being scolded, or maybe just dramatically side-eyed, by a priest while measuring a beard template. It's hard to read expressions on stick figures with eyeliner, but you can imagine the exchange. Kanuhotep, that beard is 2 degrees off angle. You want the gods to smite us again? Sorry, master. I sneezed while shaping the curl. Sneeze forgiveness aside, making these beards was both a technical and spiritual endeavor. Some makers reportedly fasted or purified themselves before crafting a new piece. They might recite prayers or work only during certain phases of the moon. After all, they weren't just shaping metal, they were weaving status and power into wearable theology. And while most of the examples we have are stylized representations, stone carvings, tomb frescoes, or rare surviving pieces tucked away in museum vaults, we know that the design rules remained startlingly consistent over thousands of years. That's serious brand integrity. One quirky little tidbit. Some of the training beards, yes, training beards may have been made from bundled reeds and mud, used for practice by young priests learning the chin craft ropes. Congratulations, apprentice, you've passed the mud braid exam. You may now attempt linen under supervision. There's even talk among fringe scholars of a beard blessing ritual, a kind of pre-use ceremony where the finished fake beard would be passed over incense smoke, sprinkled with sacred water, and possibly rubbed with scented oil. Because nothing says I take my symbolic facial hair seriously like giving it a spa day before use. All this effort, this precision, this beard-centric devotion, it speaks to more than just religious fervor. It shows how detail-oriented ancient Egyptians were. To them, every piece of sacred gear was a channel between the earthly and the divine. You didn't wing it. You didn't improvise a chin strap. You followed the rules, honored the materials, and when it was time to don the beard, you did so with the full weight of history pressed against your jaw. You slow your steps now, the temple workshop behind you, your mind filled with glinting tools and the hum of sacred beeswax. You imagine the artisans of old hunched over their benches, whispering prayers as they twisted gold wire and braided symbols into form. And somewhere in the shadows, half forgotten but not quite gone, a whisper from the past curls into your ear. May your beard be balanced, your cord unfrayed, and your curl divine. Tomorrow you'll find yourself wandering deeper into public ceremonies where every citizen, not just priests and kings, might get a chance to touch the divine, or at least borrow its style for the afternoon. You wake the next morning, Or rather, you realize you never quite fell asleep, lulled into a half-dream by the gold-threaded memories of artisan workshops and scented beard ceremonies. The temple district stirs softly now. Distant footsteps echo through columned halls, a priest chants somewhere near the sacred lake, and from the open courtyard beyond, the scent of morning bread drifts in on the breeze. You stretch mentally at least and begin your slow return to the heart of public life. It's time to talk pageantry. And not just any pageantry, full-blown, incense-soaked, cymbal-crashing, crowd-gasping, ceremonial festivals where entire cities seem to orbit around a single divine chin decoration. Because here's the thing, while pharaohs wore their ceremonial beards in private rituals and temple processions, it was during grand public festivals that these accessories really shone. Literally and figuratively. You weren't just ruling, you were performing rule. Take the Apet Festival in Thebes, for example, an annual mega event that could last up to a month. Processions snaked through the streets, priests juggled offerings, dancers spun until they forgot their names, and there at the center of it all, the pharaoh gliding through the crowd on a bark, donning the iconic symbols of divine kingship. Crown check, staff, and flail check. That stiff, slightly shimmering, very serious fake beard, absolutely. In these moments, the beard wasn't just an accessory, it was a power amplifier. A sign to the people that their ruler wasn't just some sunburned guy in a chariot. He was Horus made flesh, Osiris reborn, a god's chin on a mortal's face. Historians still argue whether all festival beards were made of gold or if lightweight versions were used for long processions. After all, imagine trying to maintain regal posture with a solid metal beard digging into your throat in 100-degree desert heat. Even the gods would need a breather. But some records suggest these ceremonial beards had cooling mechanisms, hollow designs with airflow spaces, or small linen pads soaked in perfumed water to cushion the chin. Imagine a royal sweat rag hidden behind the divine jawline. Practical and holy, ancient multitasking. What's fascinating is that these ceremonial appearances weren't one-sided performances. The people participated. Crowds would chant phrases about the king's beard blessings, praise, and occasionally delightfully poetic metaphors. One fragment of a temple hymn refers to the king's beard, like the tail of the sacred ibis curling with wisdom. Bit dramatic, but you've got to respect the imagery. And it wasn't just the king. During some festivals, high officials, temple dancers, even certain initiates into religious mysteries, were permitted to wear symbolic beards usually made of dyed flax or papyrus fiber. Not gold, mind you. You had to earn your metallic chin. But even a braided linen beard could elevate someone into a temporary symbol of divine presence. It was a kind of costume alchemy, wrap your chin right, and for an afternoon, you embodied something greater than yourself. There are reliefs showing rows of priests with carefully looped beards marching in unison faces, set in expressions of cosmic solemnity. Others show masked dancers wearing elaborate wigs, and false beards shaped like lotus roots, possibly in honor of fertility gods or seasonal rebirth. And then there are depictions of children in processions wearing miniature versions of sacred beards, perhaps as part of an initiation rite. It's like the divine version of a school play. Adorable and mildly terrifying. One fringe theory, delightfully unsupported but irresistible, suggests that in some festivals, officials passed around a community beard, a kind of sacred accessory worn by different participants at different stages of a ritual. Like a holy relay baton, only itchier. Even more tantalizing, there's a faded wall painting in Karnak that shows what might be a beard offering booth. People lined up to touch or kiss a suspended ceremonial beard. It's unclear if this was a religious act, a symbolic blessing, or just excellent ancient marketing. But imagine the scene, hundreds of townsfolk queuing beneath banners of Anubis, waiting their turn to smooch the chin of divine protection. The beard in these contexts did more than tie someone to Osiris. It tied the community together. Everyone had a role to play, whether they were wrapping their own ceremonial beard, composing a hymn about it, or simply whispering reverent jokes about how crooked the royal curl looked this year. And speaking of jokes, let's not pretend ancient Egyptians were humorless. One preserved note written by a palace scribe lightly mocks a visiting dignitary's ceremonial beard as more fit for a goat than a god. Another jabs at a courtier who lost his beard in the wind. Translation: either the glue failed or the gods were making a point. Either way, chin-based fashion wasn't without its risks. Still, the symbolism stuck, literally and metaphorically. Even for the ordinary citizen standing in the third row of a dusty procession, squinting at the shimmer of gold through incense smoke, the message was clear. This wasn't just a pageant. It was a glimpse into something higher. By the time the processions wound down and the final hymns echoed off temple walls, that beard, the one tied to the king's jaw and glinting with divine authority, had done its job. It had made the invisible visible, the eternal wearable, and it left behind a trail of sandal prints, soft chant melodies, and probably a few sweaty chin straps drying in the sun. You step back from the imagined crowd blinking slowly. The echo of festival drums still thumps faintly in your chest. The scent of crushed lotus petals clings to the air, and somewhere nearby a child giggles while trying to wrap their pet cat in linen like a mummy. It's not going well. From here you'll journey beyond the capital, beyond the temples and public squares, into the countryside where villagers and farmers may not have had gold or grand parades, but they had something else. Their own humble ways of honoring the gods, and their own makeshift beards. You've left the capital now far behind the clamor of Thebes and its god-scented parades. The rhythm of the land changes out here. The Nile no longer rushes past temples wrapped in incense. Instead, it moves like a slow, sighing breath, weaving between sleepy date palms and stubborn donkey carts. You follow a narrow path through scrub and tall grass, where the sun paints everything with that warm, honey-colored light that makes even cracked mud walls look a little divine. You've come to the edge of an ordinary village, if such a thing exists in a world where crops grow, because gods say so, and the sound of frogs is considered an omen. This is the Egypt of farmers and potters of fishermen who leave offerings of stale bread for the river gods, and of families who whisper bedtime prayers to statues carved from soft limestone. And yes, even out here, without the gold, without the parade, you'll find beards. Not the kind that sparkle under a crown, not the kind that curl with theological precision, but modest, sometimes handmade, sometimes imagined. Faux facial hair meant to connect ordinary people to the extraordinary world above. See, while the big cities had workshops and rituals, the countryside had its own chin-based customs. These weren't decreed by priests in elaborate headdresses. These were born from oral tradition, passed through generations, probably while someone was kneading bread or chasing chickens. Let's take funerary dolls, for example. Sometimes buried with commoners, these little figures, known today as ushapti, were often made of clay or carved wood, and in many cases they featured the telltale painted-on beard of Osiris. A humble villager might never wear a ceremonial beard in life, but in death they got one, or at least their doll did, a small but potent sign that they too were seeking a connection to the god of the underworld, even if their version looked more like a charcoal smudge than royal jewelry. And then there were household shrines, tucked into corners made of mud brick or pottery shards with tiny figurines of deities. Some rural families are believed to have crafted their own versions of Osiris or Horus, complete with scrap fabric beards tied on like makeshift costumes. Imagine a child's clay figure with a painted face and a stiff little cord under its chin. It might look silly to you, but to them it was sacred, reverent, maybe even protective. Historians still argue whether these homemade beards were used in formal rituals or simply in private devotion. Some say they were only symbolic, never actually worn. Others believe certain villagers did wrap themselves in linen and add a beard, especially during morning harvest blessings or rites of passage. No clear consensus, which honestly just adds to the charm. The idea that out there in some half-forgotten village, an old woman might tie a string around her jaw and hum a song to Osiris, it makes the entire kingdom feel more human. And let's not forget charm amulets. These tiny tokens, often worn around the neck or sewn into clothing, sometimes featured gods or sacred animals, and occasionally a stylized beard. One copper amulet found near the Fayum region shows a dwarf god with a curly beard and exaggerated smile, possibly worn to invoke protection or maybe just to encourage a good harvest. Because nothing says please make the barley grow like a cheerful bearded deity doing jazz hands on your tunic. One fringe theory suggests that in some rural marriages, grooms would wear a symbolic beard, even if they couldn't grow one naturally. A local spin on divine masculinity. We don't have much physical proof, but a few worn figurines seem to support the idea. Plus a scratchy note from a merchant complains that he had to lend my beard cord again. My cousin marries twice this year. A wedding beard rental situation, delightfully likely. Of course, there were probably jokes too. Country folk aren't immune to humor, especially when it comes to tying things to your face. One weathered graffito scrawled into the plaster of a village wall reads roughly, "Henu wore the goat's tail again. He thinks it makes him look holy. Poor Henu. He was trying." Still behind the teasing, there was genuine respect. These symbols, no matter how humble, offered a glimpse into divine order. They were little threads tying you to eternity. And out here with no temples or official chants, those threads mattered. Picture a midsummer night. The fields are dark. Crickets chirp. A family gathers around a clay oil lamp. The grandmother kneels before a small idol, just a hunk of limestone, with eyes scratched in, and a string beard tied carefully around the chin. She closes her eyes, mumbles a prayer. Her grandchildren mimic her motions, one of them giggling as they nudge their own string-bearded doll into the circle. It's not a pharaoh's procession, no gold, no linen curls. But in its own quiet way, it's just as powerful. Because whether you're wrapped in a robe of stars, or sitting in the dust with your sandals half off, the gesture's the same, are reaching upward. A whisper into the dark, a belief that somewhere out there Osiris listens. And maybe he appreciates the effort, even if your ceremonial beard was once part of a scarecrow. You lean back now, letting the rhythm of village life settle into your bones. Dogs bark faintly in the distance. A baby cries, then quiets. And you drift a little deeper into that dreamlike state between waking and sleep. But don't close your eyes yet, because next you'll travel back in time again, not to the temples or the fields, but into the minds of the artists. The ones who painted, carved, and immortalized these beards on stone, forever curling beneath the chins of gods and kings alike. You slip now into a quiet corridor of history, one line not with gold or incense, but with chisels, paint pots, and the slow, steady heartbeat of creation. You find yourself inside the dim workspace of a tomb painter, cool, shadowy, and thick with the smell of crushed pigment and old limestone. Outside, the world is full of farmers and falcons. But in here, things move differently. Time slows to the rhythm of a brushstroke. The beard in this sacred little room is not a thing to be tied or worn. It is to be drawn, etched, painted, immortalized. If kings used fake beards to become gods and public artists, gave those gods their forever faces. And every beard, every stiff curl, every elegant angle was carefully chosen. Not just for style, but for meaning. Because in Egyptian art, there was no improvising. No just sketch it however you feel. Nope. The style guide was older than anyone in the room, and breaking it wasn't edgy, it was blasphemy. So when you see Osiris painted on a tomb wall, reclining in post-resurrection confidence with his curved beard, like a question mark of authority that wasn't decorative, that beard told you who he was, what he represented, and where your soul should be aiming when your heart was weighed. The standard Osirian beard, if you're wondering, is that long, narrow, curved piece that arches forward at the tip. It was never accidental. That upward curl, symbol of eternity, of regeneration, of the soul rising. If you ever get reincarnated as an ancient Egyptian tomb painter, do not paint that thing straight. It's a celestial faux pas. Historians still argue whether the curved beard originated with depictions of the gods or whether kings co-opted it to bolster their divine claims. Like everything in pharaonic Egypt, it's hard to tell where fashion ends and theology begins. But what's clear is that once the beard entered the visual lexicon, it stayed like eyeliner pyramids and people pretending cats were totally in charge. But here's the fun part. The more you study ancient Egyptian art, the more subtle the beard code becomes. You start to notice variations. The curve of Osiris's beard differs slightly from that of Ptah, the creator god. Horus, young and warlike, tends to get a shorter square version, something practical for smiting enemies. Thoth's beard, often worn while he's mid-scribble with a reed pen, is thinner and more scholarly. Beard typography, basically. And then there's the pharaoh himself. On official carvings, he's given a stylized beard, even if the real-life king couldn't grow one. Artists had to toe a delicate line, make the beard divine, yes, but also not too godlike. Pharaohs weren't meant to outshine the pantheon. They were intermediaries, chin-level diplomats between heaven and earth. One fringe theory holds that there was a secret artist guild, that debated these beard styles like modern-day designers argue about fonts. Did the king's beard need more authority energy? Should the Osirian curl point northward on a west-facing tomb? We'll never know. But considering how consistent some of these styles were for centuries, someone was keeping tight creative control. And don't think it was all brushwork. Stone carvers played their part too. Imagine spending 3 weeks carving a single inch of royal beard into granite. That's not just patience, it's spiritual endurance. The ancient Egyptians believed that carving a god's image brought it to life, which means that every time a craftsman etched a curly beard onto a sarcophagus, they weren't just doing their job. They were breathing eternity into stone. There's even evidence that some artists signed their work tiny names hidden behind collars or under feet. Not for fame, just a quiet "I was here to the gods." Some of them even left little jokes in their sketches. One tomb wall underlayer shows a trial version of a pharaoh's beard that's way too long, curling into what looks like a fishhook. Did the artist get carried away, or was that a very ancient inside joke? Either way, it didn't make the final draft. That's the power of these artists. They filtered the divine. They edited gods. But the work wasn't just for tombs. Public walls, temples, shrines, they all bore the mark of these bearded portraits. Even statues had removable or interchangeable beard pieces. A granite king might wear one style in the temple, another during a festival, like having both a casual and formal beard accessory. If only modern job interviews were so flexible. And of course, the beard's symbolism evolved. In the Old Kingdom, it was shorter and often straighter. By the New Kingdom, things got dramatic, longer curls, sharper tips, even more intricate designs. It mirrored how divine kingship itself became more performative. The beard followed suit, form followed function, followed religion, followed fashion. One particularly striking example comes from the Temple of Hatshepsut. Yes, the famous female pharaoh we met earlier. Her reliefs show her with the full Osirian beard, even as her body retains some delicate feminine features. It's not awkward, it's revolutionary. A visual declaration that she too could rule between worlds. An artist made it happen. So now as you gently walk through this corridor of dusty pigments and time-stained limestone, you feel the gravity of those brush strokes and chisel marks. They didn't just decorate, they translated eternity. And as you leave the studio, stepping into the cool evening where the Nile hums just beyond the walls, you carry something quiet with you, the understanding that even symbols as small as a beard could anchor an entire civilization's beliefs. A visual whisper of power echoing across centuries. But don't rest your head just yet. There's still another layer to peel back, one beyond tombs and temples. A layer where the beard meets magic, superstition, and the kinds of rituals that make modern life feel almost boring by comparison. Now you find yourself wandering into a much stranger part of Egypt. Not stranger in the sense of crocodiles dancing in tutus, though given Egyptian art, that wouldn't be entirely surprising, but stranger in the sense that the rules are different here. Looser, dreamier. You're walking into the world of magic, not card tricks and hats with rabbits, but spells, amulets, protective charms, and long mumbled incantations spoken under one's breath in flickering candlelight. In this world, the beard wasn't just a badge of authority or a divine accessory. It was a magical object, a symbol with teeth in the figurative sense, and maybe, depending on the spell, even in the literal sense. Because Egyptians didn't mess around when it came to magic. For them, it wasn't fiction, it was infrastructure. Right up there with farming, the flood cycle, and the proper way to wrap a cat. You're inside a small reed-roofed house now, the kind only the lucky archaeologists find under sand, perfectly preserved, like a memory sealed in beeswax. At the far end, tucked behind a shelf of worn pottery and dried herbs, there's a modest ritual altar, and there in a woven basket lies a false beard, nothing grand. Just some stiffened cloth and a bit of resin, shaped roughly like the divine ones you've seen in temple carvings. It's darkened by time and possibly some goat-related incidents. But to the people who once owned it, that thing was powerful. Here's the thing: Egyptians believed in Heka, a concept that's hard to translate directly, but you can think of it as divine magic. Life force, cosmic wiring. Everything had Heka. Gods, people, objects, words, especially words. And especially when they were spoken in rituals. The beard, when worn during one of these rituals, wasn't just decorative, it activated Heka. It turned the wearer into a temporary vessel, someone who could channel divine energy, invoke protection, or tiptoe through the afterlife bureaucracy without getting metaphorically eaten. Historians still argue whether fake beards were used exclusively by priests during magic rituals or whether ordinary folks ever wore them in domestic ceremonies. Some texts suggest strict temple protocols. Others hint that grieving families mid-morning would don them during laments for the dead. One spell even references the beard that awakens the gate, whatever that means. Delightfully ominous. Let's talk about funerary texts because, of course, they had a beard clause. The Book of the Dead, that collection of spells meant to help the deceased navigate the afterlife, includes illustrations and descriptions where the soul depicted as a figure in a beard stands confidently before Osiris. Sometimes the dead become Osiris. Sometimes they just cosplay as him hard enough that the gates swing open. Either way, the beard is the VIP pass. One lesser-known spell tucked into the coffin texts of the Middle Kingdom refers to a charm worn beneath the chin, binding the breath of Ra to the throat of the petitioner. Scholars think this might be referencing a ceremonial beard worn not to impress, but to breathe sacred breath, to speak words that matter. Even the god's own beards had magical properties. In myth, when the god Set murders Osiris and scatters his body across Egypt like some divine piñata, Isis sets out to collect the pieces. And according to some fringe interpretations, she recovers not just the heart and hands and, well, most of him, but his beard too. A symbol that his identity, his divinity, could still be reassembled, rebearded and reborn. In magical papyri, handwritten texts full of odd spells and delightful weirdness, you'll find references to rituals where the practitioner draws down the beard of power or calls forth the chin knot of judgment. These may have been metaphorical, or not. One fragment describes applying sticky paste under the jaw before invoking Thoth. I mean, maybe it's a spell. Maybe it's glue for beard application. Who's to say? Let's not forget the talismans. You're in the open market now, sun-blaring flies buzzing around baskets of figs, and there among the trinkets, a row of amulets shaped like beards. Some coiled like a serpent, others straight and rigid. They're strung on leather cords polished to a sheen. A seller shouts, "Guaranteed to keep your soul intact." You buy one because why not? These beard-shaped amulets weren't just souvenirs. They were pocket-sized symbols of protection. Some were slipped into mummy wrappings, others kept in households or worn around the neck during dangerous journeys. If you couldn't wear a full ceremonial beard, you could at least carry a tiny one close to your chest, just in case the afterlife threw you a curveball. A particularly curious piece comes from the late period, an ivory beard with a hollow center discovered in a cache near a priest's tomb. It may have been filled with scented resin or powder, meant to breathe the scent of Osiris, one researcher speculates. Or maybe it was just a very ancient form of beard perfume. Either way, divine aromatherapy. Of course, not all magical beard moments were serious. In one comical folktale preserved on a scrap of papyrus, a drunk man attempts to summon a protective spirit and accidentally ties his cooking pot to his face as a beard. The spirit still shows up, but reportedly refuses to speak while the fool wears a stew pan. Even divine forces have standards. But jokes aside, the magic was real to them. Beards had weight. They were part of the invisible scaffolding that held up belief in life after death, in transformation, in protection from the unseen. They weren't just accessories. They were spells you wore. Now, as the light dims and the sun stretches into a final yawn across the desert, you rest your feet and your thoughts beneath a swaying fig tree. The air tastes of warm clay and cardamom. Somewhere nearby, a prayer is being whispered into a darkened corner of a home, and maybe, just maybe, a small beard is tied beneath a hopeful chin. And with that, you slip a little further into stillness. But don't drift off just yet. There's a royal tomb waiting in the distance, and a very famous beard that took a little detour. You're walking now along a hushed path in the Valley of the Kings. The cliffs are chalky white, almost blinding under the midday sun, and every step echoes faintly between the stone walls, like you're being watched by the mountain itself. You know what's waiting ahead, don't you? The tomb. The big one. Tutankhamun. You can practically feel the weight of centuries pressing against the sealed doorway as you step closer. It's 1922, sort of. Carter's about to knock a hole through history, and what you're here for isn't the gold. It isn't the chariots or the throne or the mummified snacks. It's the beard. You squint into the dim chamber, past the wall paintings and ceremonial couches shaped like hippos, And there on the iconic gold death mask of Tutankhamun sits one of the most famous fake beards in the world. Or it was sitting there. Let's talk about that. Tutankhamun's burial mask is breathtaking, sure. All that gold and lapis lazuli inlaid eyes and striped headdress. But it's that false beard curling up in the Osirian style that seals the deal. That little chin flourish says this is not just a king. This is a divine being reborn, resurrected, and prepped for eternity. Or as we now know, prepped for a few millennia of relative peace, followed by a flurry of British excitement and museum drama. Because, spoiler alert, the beard came off. Yes, sometime after the mask was excavated and shipped off to Cairo, the glued-on ceremonial beard snapped off. Not during the dramatic discovery, not even during transport. No, it happened later under the glowing fluorescence of museum maintenance. Historians still argue whether it was an accident during cleaning or an ill-advised attempt to reattach it for display. Either way, someone panicked and decided to fix it with epoxy, industrial grade. The kind you'd use for kitchen countertops, not ancient gold relics. The result? The beard was stuck back on, but with visible glue overflow hardening around the chin, like a very unholy crust. It looked less like the breath of Osiris and more like a fifth-grade art project gone wrong. And the public, upon noticing, was not amused. Cue scandal, restoration experts, apologies. An emergency team was brought in to gently remove the epoxy and repair the mask using methods that wouldn't enrage every archaeologist from here to Thebes. Eventually, they succeeded. The beard was restored with reverence. But it remains a reminder that sometimes even the afterlife isn't safe from bad adhesive decisions. Still, the fact that Tutankhamun's mask had a beard tells us something deeper. He was young, maybe 18 when he died. He likely had no real facial hair at all. But in death, he was given the full divine treatment, headdress, beard, and all. Because the afterlife wasn't about realism, it was about transformation. To pass through the gates, you didn't just become better, you became Osiris. Curved beard and everything. And it wasn't just Tut. Other royal mummies were buried with ceremonial beards, or at least depictions of them. Ramses II, Seti, or even queens like Hatshepsut were shown with that iconic chin curl. The funerary beard wasn't optional. It was your cosmic passport, your immortal LinkedIn profile picture. But let's go back to Tut for a second, because here's the quirky bit. He's one of the only pharaohs we have such an intact visual of, and his beard isn't particularly large. It's elegant, tapered, more of a divine exclamation mark than a full goatee. Some scholars think this was intentional to show reverence without overstepping divine boundaries. Others believe it was just an artistic choice for a younger ruler. Historians still argue whether the modest size of the beard implies humility, brevity of reign, or simply teenage chin proportions. Either way, the beard's inclusion was non-negotiable. It was welded glued onto his divine identity. Just like all those depictions we've wandered through the gods with their beards that defy gravity, the kings who needed a little chin helped the tomb walls that painted power into every hair curl. There's also an echo of drama here. Because even though the beard broke off, the idea of it stayed intact. People weren't outraged because the mask lost structural integrity. They were outraged because a sacred symbol was damaged. It's like if the Mona Lisa lost her smile or someone scribbled YOLO onto the Rosetta Stone. The beard in Tutankhamun's case is more than gold. It's a visual prayer, a ceremonial promise, and its loss, even temporarily, was like a cosmic hiccup. You step away from the mask now respectfully. The tomb behind you hums with silence. Outside the valley, heat presses against your skin like a warm stone blanket. And the lesson lingers. Even the smallest adornment, just a little curve under the chin, can carry the weight of eternity. Back in the museum, the repaired beard gleams again. Secure, regal, forgiven perhaps. And tourists file past it by the thousands each year, snapping photos of a teenage king, frozen forever in his bedtime beard. It's a strangely comforting image. Even in death, there's style, symbolism, and when necessary, glue. But now let's step away from the spotlight. You've seen the royal version of the beard, its glory and its mishaps. Let's go humbler. To the towns, to the homes, to the living men and women who might have picked up this fashion for reasons less divine and maybe a little more domestic. You leave the royal tombs behind, brushing a fine layer of desert dust from your sleeves as you descend from that lofty world of pharaohs and gold leaf. The air shifts. Less ceremonial, more lived in. Now you're walking into the crooked alleys of an ordinary Egyptian town, a place where the gods are still worshipped, but where laundry flaps from windows and someone's yelling at a goat in the distance. And here, surprisingly, you still spot the beard. Not in gold, not curling in divine elegance, but there on a humble little statuette tucked inside a corner shrine, and again painted onto the wall of a modest family tomb, the kind that tells you these people weren't royalty. They were merchants, scribes, stonemasons. But still the beards show up. So, what gives? It turns out that fake beards weren't just for gods and kings. By the New Kingdom, the look had trickled down. Not everyone had a gold chin strap, of course, but the symbolism that spread like a fashion trend with divine PR. A kind of, if it's good enough for Osiris, it's good enough for Uncle Moriah logic. And so in festivals, rituals, and maybe even small private ceremonies, average citizens started dabbling in beard wearing too. One fringe theory even suggests that traveling performers, yes, ancient Egypt had street entertainers, would wear small cloth beards when reenacting religious tales. Imagine it, a crowded street corner, a beat-up lute plinking in the background, and an actor dramatically declaiming the resurrection of Osiris, while his fake beard flaps gently in the Nile breeze. Broadway, eat your heart out. Historians still argue whether commoners used actual wearable beards or just painted them on statues and walls to borrow divine imagery, but evidence suggests both happened. In some burial sites, simple masks have been found with molded beards crafted from plaster or linen soaked in resin. These weren't royal. They were DIY afterlife prep kits. Even more curious, in one recovered, yes, they had wills an elderly woman leaves a small, ceremonial beard to her son. No mention of what it was made of, but she refers to it as my sacred knot. Sweet, right, and maybe a little weird. But that's ancient Egypt for you, equal parts tender and eccentric. In village temples, the local priest, sometimes just a literate elder with a knack for chanting, might don a symbolic beard before performing seasonal rites. Nothing elaborate, just something tied on with a cord soaked in incense and stiffened with, the usual ancient Egyptian go-to-tree sap honey or maybe crocodile dung. Not joking. They used it for everything from contraception to cosmetics, and probably, regrettably, beard glue. These faux beards, while lacking the grandeur of their royal cousins, still carried power. They connected people to the divine. They allowed the poorest farmer or the most exhausted baker to say, even just for a moment, I am Osiris. I rise. I endure. And honestly, isn't that the ultimate flex? You've just spent 12 hours pounding barley? Your sandals are falling apart. Your neighbor's cat keeps stealing your fish, and still you tie a threadbare beard under your chin and join the dawn ritual like a cosmic champion. Talk about resilience. You wander past one humble shrine, ducking under a sagging lintel, and spot a mural half faded by time. It shows a family gathered in prayer. The central figure, a man hands raised in supplication, has a tiny, uneven beard painted on. Not elegant, more optimistic, like someone's child attempted it with a crayon. But it's there, because he mattered, because in that moment he was sacred. Even children's toys weren't immune. In a box of grave goods from Deir el-Medina, a workers' village near the Valley of the Kings, archaeologists found a small clay figure with a cheerful painted beard and a loop for hanging it like a charm. Whether it was a doll, a talisman, or just ancient Egypt's weirdest action figure is up for debate. But the symbolism stuck. Let's talk practicality, because even the most faithful citizen sometimes had to multitask. One linen beard fragment found in a domestic excavation site was found stuffed inside a jar of dried lentils. Was it stored for safekeeping, repurposed? Or did someone confuse their religious accessories with dinner prep? We may never know. But we do know this: the beard was not garbage. It was tucked away, not thrown out. It's easy to imagine these moments now, an exhausted scribe reaching for his family's old ritual beard on a festival day, fingers brushing the fraying edges, tying it on with a smile, and maybe a muttered, still fits. Then stepping into the town square with the sun behind him and that strange little scrap of fabric transforming him into something ancient and powerful. Because in Egypt, belief wasn't reserved for priests and pyramids. It lived in every home, every story told by firelight, every awkwardly painted chin ornament. That's what made it magical. The beard wasn't just for pharaohs. It was for everyone who believed enough to wear it. And before you get too misty-eyed, let's not forget the occasional mishaps. One temple mural includes what looks like a priest mid-ritual, with his beard slipping sideways. His fellow priests appear to be just barely suppressing laughter. Divine power, yes, but even Osiris probably had a bad beard day now and then. So here you are in the last warm hour of the afternoon. The breeze has picked up, carrying the smell of bread and burning herbs. Somewhere a chorus of voices rises, not trained singers, just neighbors chanting praise to the gods and ancestors. And in the center of the crowd, an old man ties on a tattered ceremonial beard. He closes his eyes, he lifts his arms, and for one heartbeat he becomes eternal. You watch, you breathe it in, and you realize this whole time, through kings and mummies and myths and mishaps, it was never about the beard itself. It was about who you became when you wore it. You're walking slower now. The Nile is in sight again, calm and wide, like it's been holding its breath since the beginning of time. The air is cooler, the sun lower, and somewhere nearby the soft plunk of water against a wooden boat keeps rhythm with your thoughts. It's time to finish the journey, not with another pharaoh, not with a monument, but with an idea. Because as much as this story has twisted and turned from gold mass and glued on mishaps to farmers praying in borrowed beards, there's something profoundly unshakable beneath it all. The ancient Egyptians were obsessed with identity. Not in the modern, what's your star sign and preferred smoothie blend way. In the deeper sense. In the sense of becoming something more, of transforming. And the beard that was a tool. A shortcut to the divine. A visual spell cast across the chin announcing, I am worthy of eternity. You walk along a dirt path by the riverbank, now past fields of flax and green shoots just breaking through the soil. Farmers are calling to each other in a language long since faded from living mouths. But the rhythm of life is unchanged. Water, sun, earth, and above it all, the idea that what you wear can change who you are. That's not so different from you, really. Maybe you've never tied a beard under your chin before sunrise, but haven't you had a lucky jacket? A first date shirt, something that made you stand a little taller, walk a little slower, feel a little more like yourself. Now imagine that, but with eternity on the line. To the ancient Egyptians, death wasn't an end. It was a threshold. And the beard that was your passcode, your declaration. I am Osiris. I rise again. Even if in life you'd been ball broke or just not particularly beard inclined. And that's where things get really interesting, because it wasn't just men who embraced this transformation. Remember Hatshepsut? We met her back in the palace corridors, the king who wore the beard, not to pretend she was a man, but to become a pharaoh. That's the power of these symbols. They weren't drag, they were destiny. Historians still argue whether every queen who donned the false beard did so for politics or piety. But what's undeniable is that the symbol allowed them to transcend the limitations of their time, to rise above gender, age, biology, to step into the realm of myth. And let's be honest, who wouldn't want that? The false beard was never just about facial hair. It was a visual poem, a sacred accessory, a literal chin-up in the face of death. And as you've seen, it endured. Even when it cracked, fell off, or got glued back on with questionable epoxy, the meaning remained. Which is why today in museums around the world, those little beards still carry so much weight. Tourists lean in, cameras flash, children point, and somewhere deep in the collective memory, a whisper rises. This meant something. This was power. This was rebirth. This was identity. And it's not done yet. Even now, archaeologists keep finding new images, new fragments. In one recently uncovered tomb near Saqqara, there's a mural showing a figure with a beard unlike any seen before, half curved, half straight, like someone was experimenting with both divine styles at once. Was it a mistake, a joke? A local fashion rebellion, no one knows. But it proves one thing: the beard was still evolving, just like the people who wore it. So you walk a little further, feeling the last light soften on your skin. The Nile glows. Papyrus reeds nod in the breeze. Somewhere a heron lifts off, wings wide, catching the wind like a slow exhale. You smile, because now finally you understand the false beard wasn't false at all. It was hope. It was faith. It was the world's most sacred costume, and it fit everyone who dared to believe. The sun dips. The sky turns velvet. You let out a slow breath like a blessing, and the day slips into quiet. Wind down 300 words, And now, dear listener, with the river still whispering in your ears, and the last sands of this ancient journey settling gently beneath your feet, it's time to let the world grow quiet. The faces of gods and kings fade softly into the dark. The sound of chisels tapping, stone, the rustle of linen in temple corridors, even the laughter of festival crowds, they all drift off like smoke in the night. You've walked alongside pharaohs and farmers through deserts and across millennia, and now your steps slow to stillness. Let your breath match the rhythm of the Nile, slow, steady, ancient. There's no need to remember every fact, every name, every gilded chin strap. They're safe now, tucked away in the folds of memory, where they'll resurface like lotus blossoms, only when needed. You're floating now in a warm twilight that wraps itself around your thoughts like soft linen. You've seen how something so small, just a loop of cord and a painted curl, can hold the weight of eternity. And maybe you've carried a bit of that wonder with you into this quiet moment. So rest now. Let the silence rise around you like temple walls. Let your body soften, your thoughts unspool. The gods are at peace, the river keeps flowing, and you've traveled far enough for one night. Sleep, gentle traveler, the beards will be here when you wake.